Hello, everyone. Tonight, we are walking barefoot across a swamp where the ferns shimmer with frost and steam coils from between your claws. The dawn is gray. A layer of thin ice has formed on puddles where your snout leans to drink, and when you lift your foot to take the next step, the cold clings to your toes like wet leather. The air smells of sulfur and wet bark. Somewhere off in the fog, a crested dinosaur lets out a yawn that sounds suspiciously like a foghorn. You blink, stretch, and realize there is no fire, no shelter, no heater humming in the walls, just the ground, the chill, and your feet. And it's going to be a very long day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing the spread across time zones. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You shuffle along the edge of a bog, your breath condensing in slow clouds and your claws crackle against the frozen reeds. You're not supposed to be cold. You're a dinosaur. This is the age of heat and humidity, of jungles and volcanic vapors. And yet, here you are. Cold feet, literally. For a long time, the popular image of the Mesozoic world was a hot one. Steamy jungles, scorched deserts, dripping with primeval sweat. And yes, large parts of it were like that, especially during the Triassic and early Jurassic, when Earth's continents were still cuddled together in a hothouse greenhouse called Pangea. But here's the twist. It wasn't always summer. Paleoclimatology. The study of ancient climates shows that dinosaurs lived through ice frost and some incredibly brisk mornings. You crunch forward past a clump of horsetails crusted in ice. Just north of where your feet are stepping, paleontologists in China once found fossilized leaves with cold weather adaptations, tiny ridges that reduce water loss, much like the needles on modern conifers. Near them, the footprints of herbivorous dinosaurs calmly browsing like they didn't even notice the snow on their noses. And that's the question, isn't it? Did they notice? Did they feel the cold in the way you do? Now, toes, stiff joints aching? Or were they built differently, thermally, armored against the chill? Let's talk about dinosaur skin for a moment. We know from fossil impressions that many species had tough, scaly skin, somewhat like crocodiles. Not exactly a parka, but some of them, especially the smaller theropods, showed traces of something much more interesting: fuzz. Not quite feathers, not quite fur, but something halfway in between, like a bad haircut on a baby bird. You can imagine a dromaeosaur flapping its fuzzy arms not for flight but for warmth, kind of like a prehistoric down jacket. Of course, one could ask, if it was so cold sometimes, why didn't they just migrate? Well, some probably did, but others, they stayed, and they survived. Which brings us back to your cold feet. You pause and squat beside a puddle, dipping a claw into the icy water. The shock travels up your leg and into your chest like a warning. You glance up at a ridge where a couple of long-necked dinosaurs are ambling through the mist. They don't seem bothered, but they might be hiding it. In fact, some sauropods had circulatory adaptations, countercurrent heat exchangers in their legs that may have helped keep core temperatures stable even when their feet were freezing. Still, nothing's perfect. Fossil records show evidence of healed frostbite in some hadrosaur toe bones, which means yes, they got cold feet too. And here's the offbeat fact for this segment. One of the earliest known dinosaurs, Eoraptor, was found in what's now Argentina in terrain that likely saw dry seasons cold enough to sting. Meaning dinosaurs were tough cookies right from the start? Or maybe they were just bad at checking the weather. Historians still debate whether the earliest dinos were built for the heat or just accidentally made to survive the cold. Some argue that feather-like structures evolved primarily for thermal regulation, while others think they had nothing to do with temperature and more to do with sexual display or camouflage. Either way, it seems cold toes were part of the package deal. You finally find a patch of moss dry enough to sit on. Your tail curls around your side like a blanket. Overhead, a pterosaur glides by, wings catching the first golden light. It's beautiful in that bleak, chilly kind of way. And you wonder, if you had warm feet, would you even appreciate it? Somewhere in the distance, a young dinosaur slips on ice and honks like a broken trombone. You chuckle. The world may be ancient, but slapstick is eternal. The ground crunches beneath your feet, a delicate skin of ice giving way with each careful step. You trail behind a herd of slow-moving sauropods, long-necked giants whose footsteps steam against the cold morning ground. Their massive feet sink deep into the frost-bitten soil, leaving behind imprints like shallow bathtubs. You can't help but notice how they don't even flinch. No hopping from foot to foot, no hissing at the chill, just steady, plodding grace. And you wonder, how do they not feel it? You pause beside one of their tracks, squatting down to inspect the frozen print. Within the edges, tiny crystals are forming, glistening fans that catch the dawn. You dip your claw in and wince again. Nope, still freezing. There's no denying it now. Dinosaurs did, in fact, live in cold places, and their feet were right in it. No socks, no boots, just millions of years of evolutionary trial and error standing between them and frostbite. The first thing you notice about dinosaur feet is that they're weird. Even among relatives, the diversity is bonkers. Three-toed sprinters like velociraptors strutted around with bird-like claws, while duck-billed hadrosaurs had what looked like webbed loafs for walking. Ankylosaurs, basically tank treads with toenails. And then there's the sauropods you're tailing now, pillars of meat and bone with round elephantine pads that would not look out of place in a yoga studio. Some paleontologists believe those pads were filled with soft tissue and fat natural insulation. Think of it like walking around with built-in heated floor mats. But others argue that the pads were more for shock absorption than warmth, pointing to wear patterns in the fossilized bones. Historians still debate whether these creatures developed foot insulation through fat layering, keratinized soles, or something entirely different. You step carefully over a stream where the water's frozen thin and clear like a sheet of glass. Just beneath it, fish dart nervously, their tiny bodies warm enough to keep moving. Above you, frost feathers hang from branches like ancient tinsel. It's all stunning, really, until you realize your toes are going numb. The problem is, cold starts from the ground up. Ask any camping human, and it turns out that dinosaur anatomy reveals a surprising number of solutions to the cold foot dilemma. Some species, like the dinosaurs, had broad splayed toes with curved claws that spread out their body weight, ideal for walking on snow or soft ground without sinking. It's the same principle that lets snowshoes work for humans. But you won't find a T-Rex with snowshoes, just absurdly tiny arms and some serious talon game. Still, even the mighty tyrant lizard king might have hated stepping into a puddle at 5 a.m. That's a universal truth. The odd fact here: there's a species of dinosaur called Cryolophosaurus, literally cold crest lizard, discovered in Antarctica. It lived roughly 190 million years ago, when the southern continent was still attached to Gondwana and only partially icy. But that didn't make it tropical. It had to survive months of darkness and frigid winds, and its feet long, muscular, bird-like. Not exactly woolly socks, but nimble enough to get around in the snowdrifts of early Earth. Some experts believe the Cryolophosaurus may have hibernated or entered a reptilian state of torpor, slowing down its metabolism during the worst of winter. But others laugh at that idea, pointing out that many cold region reptiles today stay active year-round. So maybe the cold didn't bother them at all. Maybe they just strutted around like it was Fashion Week at the South Pole. As you continue walking, the sauropods ahead of you fan out across a flat plain. Steam rises from their backs. You follow the trail, your feet aching a little less as the sun lifts higher in the sky. Even a few degrees of warmth makes a difference. But still, you can't help but imagine what it would have been like to have just a little more protection. And then, out of nowhere, you spot a small pack of ornithomimids jogging past. Slender-legged, fluffy-bodied, they look like prehistoric emus on a sugar high. Their feet tap lightly across the frost, barely sinking in. One of them stops to scratch its side with a toe, then sneezes. You smile. Okay, so maybe they had their own problems. If you look closely, you'll see that their feet too show signs of adaptation, compact toes, tough pads, maybe even scaled sheaths that hardened with age. Evolutionary solutions that don't care about style, only survival. And in a world where winter could sneak up and kill you, that's all that mattered. Back at the rear of the herd, one of the sauropods lets out a deep, almost amused rumble. You glance behind you and see it stepping gingerly over a patch of slick rock. Even giants get cold feet, apparently. As the sun warms the land, the frost begins to melt. Patches of grass return to green. Ferns unfurl. Water drips in lazy rhythm from tree to tree. Your toes thaw, slowly, painfully. But they thaw. And you realize something else: cold feet may not have killed the dinosaurs. But they certainly didn't help. You cross a sun-dappled clearing, and though the frost has begun to retreat into shadows, the ground still holds on to last night's chill like a grudge. Every step sends a whisper of cold up your legs, and your joints crackle in protest. You pause, shifting your weight, watching steam drift from a pile of fresh dung, warm, fragrant, and for just a moment deeply tempting. You edge closer, not to roll in it, but okay, maybe to warm your feet. Don't judge. Because now, you're starting to really ask, how did dinosaurs keep their bodies warm? Or maybe more accurately, did they? The age-old debate begins to creep in like the cold into your ankles were dinosaurs. Warm-blooded like birds and mammals, or cold-blooded like reptiles. And did that distinction matter when it came to how they handled low temperatures? The phrase you're looking for is thermoregulation. How an animal maintains its body temperature regardless of the environment. And dinosaurs, inconveniently for modern science, didn't leave us thermometers or user manuals. All we have are bones, a few fossilized tissues, and the occasional shocking clue carved in stone. You tread carefully now, stepping over fallen branches that crunch underfoot. Up ahead, a pack of dinosaurs, think mini raptors with too much caffeine, are bickering over a kill. They're fluffed out like angry pigeons' heads, darting talons scratching the icy ground. You notice how they keep hopping, moving, staying warm by sheer kinetic stubbornness. One even puffs up its proto-feathers and shakes like a wet dog. Thermoregulation. More like prehistoric cardio. But here's where it gets weird. Some recent studies of dinosaur bone microstructure show patterns of fast growth, high metabolism, and even signs of active blood circulation features more in line with endothermy or warm-bloodedness, but not all dinosaurs show those features. Some, particularly the larger ones, appear to have operated on a kind of inertial homeothermy. They were so big that their internal temperature barely changed, like a heated meatloaf that takes all day to cool. Historians still debate whether dinosaurs were fully warm-blooded across the board or whether different species evolved different strategies depending on their size, habitat, and need for energy. Some may have even been mesothermic, a weird middle ground between hot and cold that sounds like a setting on your microwave. You pass through a grove of conifers where sap has frozen mid-drip, catching sunlight like amber icicles. You stop to touch one. Solid, cold, like your fingers. And it hits you, warm-blooded or not, extremities are always the first to suffer. Let's talk feet. Again. Birds, today's closest living relatives of dinosaurs, have a nifty system called rete mirabile, a heat exchange system in their legs that minimizes heat loss. Essentially, warm blood moving from the body heats up the cold blood returning from the feet, like a medieval radiator system. Could dinosaurs have had something similar? Maybe. There's no direct fossil evidence of it. Of course, blood vessels don't fossilize well. but some leg bones show internal channels that suggest complex vascular networks. The plumbing might have been there. The insulation? Probably not, unless you were one of the feathered ones. You know the stylish crowd. A little oviraptor dances by on two clawed toes, its neck frilled with fluff like it's wearing a prehistoric boa. It chirps once sharp and unimpressed and flits up onto a rock. Its toes are bare, but it moves so fast you wonder if the cold ever has time to catch up. You follow it, stepping gingerly. Your own feet are starting to feel again, which is both good and bad. The thaw is painful, but at least it's sensation. Now, here's your odd fact: the Komodo dragon, a modern cold-blooded reptile, can actually warm up its muscles before moving by basking and raising its core temp to nearly 40 degrees C. That's 104 degrees Celsius for the Fahrenheit fans. Dinosaurs may have done the same when they could, but in freezing morning fog, the sun sometimes takes its sweet time. That's when things get dangerous. That's when the cold starts winning. You reach a ridge and look down across a frozen pond where a few dinosaurs are gathered. Tails wrapped around bodies, heads tucked beneath limbs like cats trying to pretend they don't hate winter. Some are young. You can tell by the way they shiver. And again, you're back to the question, what happens to a cold-blooded creature when the world turns cold? It slows, it stops, it dies. But warm-blooded creatures, they sweat, shiver, burn calories, survive. So maybe that's the edge. Maybe that's the trick dinosaurs were learning during these chilly stretches of their reign. A shift in biology, a tweak in strategy. You're walking through a period of transition, not just in climate, but in physiology. Warm-bloodedness isn't an on-off switch. It's a spectrum, a gamble, a long bet placed against the encroaching cold. You crouch beside a stone, curling your toes beneath your body, letting the sun finally touch your back. It's not much, but it's enough. You whisper mostly to yourself. Maybe they weren't cold-blooded, just not warm enough yet. You slide down the far side of the ridge, feet skidding slightly on the packed frost, and land with a muted crunch in a shadowed basin. The air here feels heavier, colder somehow, and quiet. Too quiet. You take a few tentative steps before noticing something etched into the hardened mud ahead. Footprints, not just one, dozens, hundreds, crossing, overlapping, trailing in different directions, some large and round, some narrow and clawed. And all of them preserved in stunning, uncanny detail, pressed deep into a surface that must have once been soft, then frozen, then buried and forgotten for millions of years. You kneel beside one three-toes, splayed a slight impression where the heel pushed down the ridge of a claw, frozen mid-gesture. It's not just a fossil. It's a moment. A pause in time. And it's cold. Fossilized dinosaur trackways have been found all over the world. But the strangest, most eyebrow-raising ones, some are located in places we now associate with serious winter. Canada, Alaska, Siberia, even parts of Australia. Not exactly flip-flop territory. And yet, there they are. Ancient footprints seemingly left behind in what had to be sub-zero conditions. Historians still debate whether these tracks were left during brief summer thaws or true winters. But some of them have microfractures in the substrate, suggesting the mud froze after the print was made before it had a chance to erode. That only happens when the weather's mean. You follow the trail, toes numb again. One set of prints is smaller, lighter, probably a juvenile. The steps wobble slightly, like the creature was limping or unsure of the slick terrain. You picture it a small ceratopsian maybe awkwardly slipping across icy ground while its mother trudges ahead more annoyed than worried. This moment didn't survive in amber or stone by accident. It got flash frozen. A sudden drop in temperature, perhaps overnight. You imagine a shallow floodplain, wet from a storm, and then a sharp cold snap. The mud hardens instantly. A miracle of timing. Like if your footprints in a snowbank suddenly turned to concrete while you were still walking. You step over the next set of prints following a narrow line toward a bend in the landscape. There, the ground darkens slightly shale and permafrost remnants. You're looking at the outline of an entire herd's journey recorded forever. It's beautiful and eerie. One of the strangest examples of this kind of preservation was found in Alaska's Prince Creek Formation, where scientists unearthed the trackways of hadrosaurs and even small carnivores that had lived in conditions with 4 months of winter darkness. Not chill, darkness. And yet they walked, fed, raised their young. That brings you to this weirdest realization of all. Maybe dinosaurs didn't just endure the cold. Maybe some of them preferred it. The odd fact here. Some birds today, like ptarmigans and emperor penguins, actually thrive in cold. They nest on ice, sleep in blizzards, and raise their chicks in the kind of weather that makes car batteries die. Birds are dinosaurs. So why wouldn't some of their ancestors be winter warriors too? But back to the ground beneath your feet. The sheer variety of prints reveals so much more than size or species. Some are spread wide, steady. Others are tighter together, tiptoed hurried. It's not hard to picture them skittering across a frozen lake like kids testing whether the ice will hold. You bet a few didn't make it. Your toes curl inside your imaginary dino feet. Hypothermia starts in the feet after all. And here's where the debate gets messy. Did these dinosaurs migrate south for winter and just leave their prints behind on a freak cold day? Or did they live here year-round, adapting like fluffy birds and shaggy mammals? Some argue their presence in polar latitudes proves cold adaptation. Others say these were brief excursions, seasonal visits, not permanent homes. You crouch beside a rock half buried in shale and pick up a small fossil. Not a bone this time, but a leaf. Glossy dark and oddly sharp at the edges, an ancient conifer. One of the types that survived in regions with freezing winters. That's what these creatures ate. Cold-compatible plants. Everything here was built to resist the freeze. Even the leaves had an agenda. The sun's climbing higher now, and the ice on the trackway begins to soften. Patches of moisture pool where claws once pressed down. It's a haunting reversal. These prints survived millions of years, but they'd vanish in minutes if exposed now. You take one last look at the trail, a frozen procession across time, and murmur, you had cold feet too. A gust of wind kicks up, scattering frost across the mud, and just like that the edges blur. A soft wind lifts powdery snow into lazy spirals as you crest a rise overlooking a glade of frost-bitten ferns. There, nestled in the white and green, are the fluff balls. At first, you think you're looking at a pile of prehistoric tumbleweeds, but then one moves, then another chirps, and suddenly a dozen little bodies uncoil and scamper through the undergrowth, kicking up snowflakes like glitter at a parade. Tiny theropods, feathered, frenetic, and undeniably smug. You crouch to watch them, breath-fogging, trying not to laugh as one of them face plants into a bush with all the grace of a flapping chicken nugget. These are the survivors, the fluffy ones. The evolutionary bet that maybe, just maybe, being warm and weird might win. It's not just cuteness, it's insulation. Those downy coats you see puffing and twitching in the cold aren't for fashion, they're for survival. And while your own toes feel like they're about to fall off, these pint-sized proto-birds look like they're throwing a winter party. They peep, they squeal, they joust with sticks. One even does a little wing flap that would have gone viral if TikTok existed in the Cretaceous. Here's the thing. For decades, dinosaurs were painted as scaly lizards stomping through steamy jungles. But fossils have been whispering another story, quiet at first, and now loud enough to dance. We've found imprints, structures, even pigmentation evidence of feathers in dozens of species, from chicken-sized raptors to juvenile tyrannosaurs. Yes, that's right. T-Rex might have started life looking like a slightly terrifying baby chick. One fossil from Liaoning, China, famously preserved a dinosaur mid-flap. Its feather impressions perfectly outlined in the ash of a volcanic blast. And it wasn't just one species. There was a whole avian-adjacent caste Microraptor Sinosauropteryx and Chiornis names that sound like metal bands but were basically prehistoric puffballs on stilts. The scientific term for this is filamentous integument, but let's not get bogged down. Basically, they were fuzzy. Some had short down, some had long plumes, some looked like they were wearing 80s leg warmers on their arms. It's a look. Historians still debate whether feathers evolved first for warmth or flight. But considering that most early feathered dinos couldn't fly to save their lives literally, the smart money's on insulation. And once you're fluffy, well, why not try gliding next? You hunker lower watching one particularly curious critter hop toward you. It cocks its head, chirps, and puffs its chest in a move that's equal parts adorable and deeply judgmental. Then it darts back to its flocktail held high like a little banner of defiance against the cold. Feathers trap heat. They're light, flexible, and replaceable, and crucially, they work even when wet, unlike scales, which just make you feel like a cold handbag. Feathers may have been the reason these little creatures survived, where others shivered, stumbled, and fossilized. Odd fact, the modern Hoatzin, a jungle bird from South America, has claws on its wings as a chick. Literal little dinosaur hands. Evolution didn't erase the past, it just disguised it with plumage and bad attitudes. You slide closer to a tree where one of the juveniles has roosted. It blinks at you, tilts its head, and then fluffs up like a microwave burrito. The movement stirs something in your brain, a sense that maybe for all our modern tech and fleece-lined boots, these creatures had it figured out long before humans even evolved toes worth protecting. Now, not all dinosaurs were feathered. Large herbivores like hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, and ankylosaurs remained more traditionally armored or scaled, but there are rumors, hints, and skin impressions that even some of them may have had bristly filaments or fuzzy juveniles. Maybe feathers were more common than we thought. Maybe we've just been looking in the wrong places. You remember that one quote from a paleontologist? If chickens had teeth, they'd be little theropods. Funny thing is, chickens did have teeth 60 million years ago, before they traded them in for beaks and bad tempers. One of the fluff balls hops up on a branch and lets out a sound like a sneeze crossed with a kazoo. It's not majestic, but it is alive and warm. And suddenly, you realize this is why the fluffy ones won. Not because they were smartest or strongest, but because they were prepared. The Ice Age didn't wait for evolution to catch up. It punished the unready. These proto-birds didn't need to outfight the cold. They outwitted it. Layer by layer, feather by feather. And somewhere along the way, they traded frostbitten toes for warm nests, tiny eggs, and eventually songs. You trudge through a narrowing valley, breath fogging thicker now as the air grows colder and thinner. There's a strange quiet here, as if sound itself has frozen. Around you, jagged cliffs rise on either side streaked with frost. And then just ahead, you spot something that makes your stomach lurch, a glacier. Not just ice, ancient ice, deep blue, and moving slow as tectonic plates, but very much alive. And there, pressed against its edge, is something unexpected. A fossil. You approach carefully. Embedded in the layered ice wall is the outline of a limb. Long bones, splayed clawed toes reaching out like it had tried to stop the freeze from swallowing it. You trace your claw along its edge. Not a mammoth, not a cave bear, a dinosaur. Welcome to Antarctica. Yes, that Antarctica, the land of penguins and blizzards, and my face just fell off wind. But back in the Mesozoic, it wasn't all ice. For a time, it was lush, carpeted in ferns and forests, a polar paradise if such a thing exists. And dinosaurs lived there, not passing through, living, breeding, freezing their metaphorical butts off. You wouldn't be the first to think, nah, dinosaurs couldn't survive that. But they did. Fossils found on James Ross Island and Mount Kirkpatrick reveal species that weren't just surviving, they were thriving. One of them, Cryolophosaurus ellioti, struts into your imagination now. A mid-sized theropod with a flamboyant head crest, kind of like Elvis, if Elvis were a meat-eating, snow-walking murder bird. Scientists discovered its bones 4,000 feet up in the trans-Antarctic mountains in rock layers that suggest seasonal snowfall and months of darkness. Historians still debate whether dinosaurs living this far south stayed year-round or migrated to lower latitudes. The lack of juvenile fossils in some layers suggests adults may have done the icy equivalent of a winter road trip. But in other places, nesting sites, hatchling bones, whole families hunkered down for the big chill. And don't forget the hadrosaurs. These duck-billed dinos left behind a baffling number of tracks and bones in what is now freezing Canada and Siberia. They probably traveled in herds. Some may have migrated, but again and again we find signs they stayed even when the snow piled up and the night stretched for months. You lean against a rock scanning the ridge. This landscape feels foreign, but it's anciently familiar. Long shadows, stinging wind, the distant crunch of footsteps on frozen ground. It's eerie how much it mirrors the Arctic today. You half expect a polar bear to wander by and look confused. Odd fact: time scientists studying fossilized pine cones in polar dinosaur habitats found growth rings that reflect extreme seasonal light shifts, 6 months of near-constant sun, followed by 6 months of night. And yet, there are signs of steady dinosaur growth through those dark periods. No hibernation slowdown, just business as usual. Which brings us back to the feet. You kneel beside a patch of fossil soil. Yes, fossil soil crumbled beneath where a dinosaur once slept. You can almost see the nest, the tail curled around tiny hatchlings, steam rising in the frigid air. The feet, probably tucked under the body like birds today do when roosting in snow. Heat conservation at its finest. They knew where to stash the cold bits. Some scientists propose that polar dinosaurs evolved slower metabolisms or even special circulation strategies to survive such extremes. Others argue they relied entirely on behavior, huddling, nesting, keeping active. The truth might lie somewhere in between or in something we've yet to imagine. You take another few steps through the icy gorge, pausing to listen. The wind howls like something ancient. Not angry, just tired. You wonder what it would have sounded like to a young Laelinosaura, a small polar herbivore with enormous eyes likely evolved to gather every scrap of winter light. Their fossils turn up in southern Australia, a region that dipped into freezing temperatures during the Mesozoic. And yet they left behind the story of long-lived, successful nest generations repeating in frost and fern. You slip a bit on a slick patch of permafrost and catch yourself, claws scraping the stone. As you steady, you glance down and spot another print. 3 toes, splayed, preserved in mud that froze before it could melt again. You press your own foot beside it, marveling at the difference in shape but not in purpose. Both pressed into the cold, both part of the same ancient lineage of stubborn survivors. The fluffy ones might have had it easier, but here in Antarctica, even the scaled giants brave the cold. They weren't all migrating. Some stayed. Dug in, endured, and you're still wondering how your toes haven't fallen off. You squint into the mid-morning glare, following a line of distorted footprints that lead into an open marsh frozen solid. The surface glitters with thin frost, smooth enough to skate across if you were brave or foolish. A few giant ferns poke up through the sheet, their fronds curled like fists waiting for sun that won't come. You step out onto the ice. It groans. Not ominously, but enough to remind you that dinosaurs, for all their might and muscle, had to tiptoe through winter just like you. Your feet press into the slick surface and the chill nips hard. But you're not here for skating, you're here for feet. Specifically dinosaur feet. You've seen prints, yes? You've seen them slip and scramble across ancient ice, But now you want to know how those feet actually worked. Ankylosaurs come to mind first. Imagine a turtle crossed with a tank and a medieval flail. You've seen their feet in fossils, broad low, and tipped with thick claws more like blunt chisels than blades. Perfect for gripping icy earth, stomping through crusted mud, or snow plowing their way across permafrost. One slogs past you now, head down tail club twitching. Each footstep sounds like wet leather slapping a log. Their feet aren't elegant, but they are efficient. Big surface area, short digits, low center of gravity. Basically snowshoes with spike. Then there are the hadrosaurs, duck-billed, social, and frustratingly adaptable. Their feet looked webbed with 3 flattened toes and heel pads that may have acted like natural insulation. Some paleontologists think those pads were composed of thick, fatty tissues, similar to camel feet or even moose hooves which stay warm even in snow. The idea that hadrosaurs were waddling around with insulated loafers strapped to their legs. Weirdly comforting. Historians still debate whether these foot structures evolved specifically for cold or whether they were just repurposed when climates shifted. Adaptation often begins as coincidence. What worked in the tropics didn't necessarily fail in frost, it just adjusted. You crouch beside a shallow indent near the ice edge. A fossilized toe bone sits partially exposed, blackened and worn by time. Its ends are bulbous, the joint surfaces polished, like someone had used them in a lifetime of slow, heavy walking. Could this have belonged to a sauropod? One of the giants, most likely. Despite their size, sauropods had surprisingly narrow front feet, more like stumps than paws. Their hind feet, though, carried a secret, a thumb claw sometimes arched upward like a disapproving eyebrow. The function of this claw remains a mystery. Defense digging. Ice pick. You roll the toe bone in your hand and realize even the biggest creatures on Earth had to figure out how not to slip and die. Just like you. The odd fact here in 2009, a team in Argentina discovered titanosaur tracks preserved in what appeared to be seasonally frozen mud. The footfalls were deep but crisp spaced like the animal had been walking cautiously, maybe even bracing itself. 100 feet long and still afraid to fall. You feel better about your own clumsy descent. You walk farther across the marsh, noticing how some dinosaurs adapted posture, not just padding. Theropods, for example, those bipedal, meat-loving maniacs, walked on their toes, not their heels. Digitigrade locomotion, like cats. Or velociraptors. This helped them move fast, but also probably kept most of their foot off the freezing ground. Birds still do it. Ever watch a chicken in the snow? It looks confused, cold, and weirdly regal all at once. And then there's the circulatory magic. You're not a scientist, but you've heard of countercurrent heat exchange. It's how penguins keep their feet from freezing off warm blood flowing next to cold blood in tight, coiled vessels, exchanging heat like a secret handshake. Did dinosaurs have this too? There's no definitive fossil proof, but the physiology isn't far-fetched. Some researchers believe large herbivores may have evolved internal thermal windows areas where blood could be warmed or cooled quickly to maintain homeostasis. If that's true, maybe their feet were not so much frostbitten liabilities as finely tuned thermostats. You cross the final stretch of ice and step onto solid ground. The instant change in temperature beneath your feet is startling. Not warm exactly, but stable, dry. And something tells you the dinosaurs knew this too. They moved with the seasons, sure. But maybe more importantly, they knew where to step. You sit beneath a stunted conifer, toes curled beneath your legs, watching the sun skim low across the frozen flatlands. Nearby, a small pachycephalosaur butts its head against a frosted log, grunting with satisfaction as it breaks apart the bark to get at frozen moss beneath. Even the headbutters had their cold day strategies. You smile. Feet may not be the flashiest part of a dinosaur, but they were the part that touched the world first. that stepped into cold rivers, climbed snowy hills, and stamped into history with every frostbitten toe. You follow a winding trail through an eerie lowland where the air tastes of dust and the wind carries nothing but silence. Ahead, the trees thin, and then like stumbling into a memory, you find it a fossil bed. Flat, wide, grim. The ground is strewn with bones. Skulls, half-buried ribs, collapsed inward tail vertebrae, curled like punctuation marks on the end of vanished sentences. You stop. The air feels colder here, like whatever happened on this patch of ground never really left. This isn't a battlefield. No tooth marks, no shattered bones. It's not a predator's feast either. These dinosaurs didn't die in a fight, they didn't die running. They died together. And that usually means one thing: something bigger than them came calling. Something slow, relentless, unseen, cold. Mass graves in the fossil record are rare but powerful. They speak of flash floods, toxic gases, droughts, and yes, sudden freezes. This site in front of you, it looks like one of the winter ones. Maybe not snow in the air, but frost in the soil. You can almost hear the groan of frozen ferns beneath the weight of the dead. You step around the remains of a hadrosaur, its eye socket pointed skyward. Its feet are still mostly intact, wide-webbed, angled just so. It looks like it slipped. Not like it tripped, but like the earth beneath it turned to ice and the creature fell into winter. One possible culprit: the seasonal cold snaps that hit when global climate systems shifted during the Mesozoic. Paleoclimate records show increasing volatility in temperature during certain period swings that could drop a balmy day into icy danger with shocking speed, especially in inland environments far from oceanic buffers. Historians still debate whether these cold snaps were regular occurrences or freak anomalies, short-lived events, or patterns that rewired entire ecosystems. But the fossils don't lie. Sometimes whole herds stopped moving. You find evidence of that here. A cluster of small juveniles bunched together. They weren't scattered by panic, they were huddled, seeking warmth, dying in a cuddle pile. Some researchers think sudden frost or blizzard events could have wiped out large groups, particularly if they were migrating or caught out in the open. Think of it like a prehistoric flash freeze, temperatures dropping fast enough to stun the metabolism of even warm-blooded species. The young, the old, the unlucky done. Odd fact, there's a fossil bed in Mongolia where dozens of protoceratops were found buried together, some on their sides, others crouched. The sediment suggests a powerful sandstorm, but some believe a temperature collapse followed it, sealing them in as a final insult. You climb a small ridge above the fossil plain, careful not to disturb anything. From here, the view is worse. Bones go on for what feels like miles. Not chaotic, just still. A silence that outlasted eons. And you realize you're looking at a prehistoric morgue, not from violence, but from exposure. Dinosaurs, especially, the big ones, had little defense against fast-acting frost. No burrows, no caves, no insulated shelters. If the cold came quick, it came hard. Even the sauropods you admired earlier would have struggled. Their massive size gave them thermal inertia, sure, but if their blood flow slowed, if their extremities froze, if they couldn't get food, game over. A little farther on, you find the imprint of a theropod foot, clear, sharp, and alone. Unlike the others, this one's heading away from the herd. A straggler or a scout. Either way, it didn't make it far. You sit near a cluster of ribs and think about how we romanticize extinction. We imagine meteors and volcanoes, fire in the sky, earth cracked open like bread. But sometimes extinction is slow, quiet. It comes in the night with a chill that doesn't lift by morning. The wind picks up now, dragging thin snow across the bones. You watch it coat the sockets, the joints, the mouths frozen mid-breath. And it hits you again. Some of these creatures may have just fallen asleep, too cold to move, and never woken up. You reach down and brush snow from a footprint. The ridges remain stubborn against the wind. a reminder that once they stood, they walked, they tried. So do you. You leave the fossil graveyard behind walking uphill into a region where the air hangs heavier, warmer, but only just. It's deceptive warmth, the kind that lingers in the lowlands before a cold front. Your feet still ache with the memory of frost. Every time they touch a sunlit stone, it feels like revenge. As you crest the slope, you look out over a lush river-fed plain. Broadleaf cycads, horsetails swaying in slow motion, and the unmistakable buzz of life. But something feels off. There's a shimmer in the air that's more than heat, a kind of tension. The plants look tired. The river runs low. The air is thick with moisture, but wrong. And then it hits you. The tropics froze. Not now, not here. But once violently without warning and in a way the world never fully recovered from. Throughout the Mesozoic, Earth's climate was largely warm and stable. No polar ice caps. High sea levels. CO2 levels that would make a modern climate scientist faint. Dinosaurs loved it. But evidence shows that even in this prehistoric paradise, cold spells came, some natural, some not so much. One of the major culprits, large igneous provinces, volcanic events on a scale we barely comprehend. When massive volcanic systems like the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province or the Deccan Traps erupted, they didn't just spew lava. They belched gases, tons of sulfur dioxide, and carbon compounds that entered the atmosphere and played roulette with the climate. You walk carefully along the edge of a dried creekbed, stepping over fossilized wood turned to brittle stone. These eruptions, scientists believe, released aerosols that reflected sunlight, dimming the planet. Global temperatures plummeted. Plant life struggled. Photosynthesis slowed. And the tropical regions, those sun-drenched Eden zones, turned frigid. Historians still debate how sudden these events were. Some argue the cooling was gradual enough for species to adapt. Others suggest short, sharp winters that hit like sledgehammers, turning rainforests into frozen tombs. Odd fact: in Brazil, fossilized tree rings show signs of abrupt stress during the late Triassic years where growth stopped cold literally. And alongside them, dinosaur remains, not scattered, clustered, as if they too had waited for warmth that never returned. You find a footprint preserved in ancient ash pressed into what was once soft jungle soil. It's a large herbivore, maybe a plateosaurus. But the angle is wrong, like it slipped, not mud, on ice. There are no claw marks to stabilize the fall, just one long smear, then nothing. The idea that dinosaurs walked through freezing jungles feels almost absurd. But consider this: tropical species are the most vulnerable to sudden temperature changes. They don't evolve to survive the cold because they never expect it. One week you're grazing under palms, the next you're covered in frost with a digestive system that can't function below 10 degrees Celsius. You pause beside a vine-covered boulder. Except the vines are stone, petrified, twisted like they were trying to shrink into themselves before death. You wonder if the dinosaurs here tried the same thing. Shrinking, huddling, moving to lower ground. Some might have fled, migrated hundreds of miles, but others stayed, not by choice, by design. Big sauropods couldn't outrun the weather. Nesting parents couldn't abandon their clutches. Juveniles couldn't make the trek. And so they waited. The consequences were catastrophic. Plant die-offs meant food shortages. Cold-induced metabolic slowdowns led to lethargy and increased predation. Some species vanished from the record entirely. Others hung on barely until the climate snapped back. But the ecosystem never really forgot. Even millions of years later, subtle signs in soil and fossil pollen show reduced diversity, fewer ferns, fewer insects, fewer dinosaurs. As if the tropics, once lush and reckless, had learned fear. You reach a ridge where the jungle ends, and ahead the landscape opens into scorched scrubland. Heat returns here, but too late. Too uneven. The balance is gone. A small, feathered theropod trots by, eyeing you with a look that says, yeah, we remember. Its feet barely leave a mark in the ashy soil. You think of all the feet that walked this land before you, bare, unshod, warm one season, frozen the next. And you wonder what was it like to be a dinosaur that depended on warmth. And suddenly woke up cold, no fire, no blankets. No idea it was coming. Only toes in the frost. And the sound of the forest dying around you. The sky has turned a strange shade dim ochre like the inside of an old lantern. You brush ash from your shoulder as the wind carries the faint scent of burnt rock and sulfur. Not smoke, exactly dust. Fine. Acidic. It stings your throat, coats your feet. You take another cautious step, the ground crackling beneath you like dried paper. Something's happened here. Something loud, something ancient. The volcanoes have started again. You're no stranger to prehistoric eruptions after all they were practically background noise in the Mesozoic. But this is different. This isn't a one-off belch from a mountain. This is volcanism on an apocalyptic scale. You're walking through the aftermath of a large igneous province event, an era-defining planetary burp where lava didn't just flow down hillsides but oozed across continents. The Deccan Traps in India, the Siberian Traps, the Central Atlantic magmatic province. These weren't your casual mountaintop tantrums, they were geological revolutions. Imagine lava spreading for hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, belching gases for hundreds of thousands of years. You step over a cracked lava plain now, each slab cooled to basalt, but still radiating the memory of fire. And the air, it's weirdly cold. That's the paradox. Volcanoes are hot, but their long-term effects are often chilling. Sulfur dioxide, one of their favorite emissions, reflects sunlight away from Earth. And when enough of it builds in the atmosphere, global temperatures drop. Fast. You stumble across a stream bed now reduced to gravel and grit. On the banks, a mummified fern lies crumpled like a discarded fan. Above it, the sky rolls gray, casting no shadows. The sun is there somewhere, but it's been dimmed by gas and ash. And the dinosaurs, they're still walking, but slower now, quieter. You see a juvenile hadrosaur in the distance, its tail low dragging. The herd ahead of it kicks up dust, unaware or unwilling to look back. Its feet scrape against the volcanic debris, leaving shallow grooves. You can tell each step takes effort. Historians still debate whether volcanic winters alone could account for mass extinctions. Some argue that species adapted. Others believe the cooling was sudden and brutal, compounded by atmospheric poisoning. The dinosaurs were likely already struggling. Volcanoes may have been the beginning of the end, softening the world for what came next. Odd fact, during the Deccan eruptions near the end of the Cretaceous, it's believed temperatures in some areas dropped by more than 10 degrees Celsius, that's 18 degrees Celsius, for those still using old numbers in a matter of decades. In Earth terms, that's fast. In dinosaur terms, whiplash. You reach a spot where dinosaur tracks once crossed this terrain. You see them faintly in the crust, shallow, warped by molten debris. Some are deep. Some end abruptly, as if their owner stumbled, collapsed, or was simply lost in the haze. The volcanic ash created its own kind of fossilization, entombing footprints, nests, and occasionally entire animals in layers of suffocating powder. But it also smothered plants, turned rivers acidic, and broke food chains like cheap string. One theropod you spy through the murk limps along the ridge. Its feet look raw pink where scales should be. The ash acts like sandpaper, abrasive, constant, inescapable. You imagine the burn, the cold, the confusion. What do you do when the sun stops warming the earth but the ground itself burns your steps? You sit on a low outcrop and exhale. The ground feels hard, dead. But the quiet is deceptive. Because here's the other part in these volcanic pulses: life didn't just suffer. It changed. Species disappeared. Others appeared. Some adapted. Some moved. But almost all were marked by it. Feathers may have thickened in the chill. Migration patterns may have shifted. Digging behaviors, burrows, nests, escape tunnels might have evolved in desperation. Those that stayed mobile survived. Those that didn't, well, you notice a burrow nearby, not dinosaur-sized smaller, something mammalian. You peer inside, half expecting a prehistoric raccoon to hiss at you. But it's empty, just fur-lined walls and scraps of plant fiber nestled safe from the wind. And you realize something bitter. While the dinosaurs braved the cold on open feet, the mammals went underground. You brush off your claws, stretch your legs, and keep moving. The ash still falls, the sky stays heavy, and your toes numb again. It's hard to say whether the volcanoes gave the dinosaurs cold feet, but they certainly gave them fewer places to warm up. By the time you make it out of the ash-blasted lowlands, your feet are filthy and sore grit, packed between your toes, joints stiff from the chill, still clinging to the volcanic haze. You crest a ridge dusted with frost and finally spot something hopeful movement. Small, quick, feathery? You smile. The raptors are back. They're not the nightmare versions Hollywood promised. These are smaller, maned like chickens gone rogue, each step light, each breath a misty puff. One pauses to scratch at the ground, flicking dirt in confident little kicks. Another stands upright, feathers fluffed like a dandelion wearing a tuxedo. And you realize something: these creatures don't care that it's cold. They were built for this. Welcome to the age of insulation, when feathers became more than display, more than odd evolutionary flair. Here, feathers were survival. And the evidence all around you. You crouch to watch a pair of dromaeosaurs nip at one another in play or practice. One slips claws, skating briefly on icy soil, then recovers. It doesn't panic. It just fluffs. And that fluff? That's the whole game. Feathers insulate by trapping pockets of air close to the skin, creating a barrier against heat loss. And unlike scales, which turn stiff and brittle in the cold, feathers stay functional, flexible. And if you're a raptor with decent grooming habits, self-cleaning. Historians still debate how widespread protofeathers were. Some say they only appeared in select theropods, your flashy hunters, your aerial experimenters. Others argue feathers were ancient and common, an unspoken inheritance passed down long before birds even thought about flapping. Odd fact: researchers have found melanosome structures in fossil feathers, tiny pigment packets that suggest not only were feathers colorful, but they may have played a role in heat absorption. Black feathers retain more heat, a fashionable and functional combo. Eat your heart out, Patagonia. You trail the raptors through a patch of snowy underbrush. Their footprints press down lightly, barely disturbing the surface. They walk digitigrade on their toes, keeping minimal contact with the cold. Their feet aren't feathered, but some evidence hints that they might have had scaly wraps or even fuzz around the ankles, like little leg warmers from a punk rock winter. One pauses to peer up at a branch, then leaps feet first into the air, claws extended, body coiled. It grabs a beetle off the bark, chirps in victory, and then lands softly in a pile of leaves. It shivers once, then fluffs up again. Feathers didn't make these creatures immune to cold, but they gave them options. That's the key difference. The big herbivores you saw earlier, they had bulk, sure, but not versatility. When the cold came, they endured. These little fluff missiles, they adapted. You come across a nesting site nestled in a sheltered gully. The eggs are long gone, but the feather impressions remain, patterns pressed into ancient silt. It's delicate, almost ghostly. The adult who sat here likely covered its eggs with its body, wings spread wide, tail curled protectively. A living blanket. This behavior echoes down into modern birds. Think of a penguin huddling its egg atop its feet. A sparrow fluffed up in snow. Even an angry rooster with steam curling off its feathers. And then there's the real kicker. Modern birds can control blood flow to their feet, reducing it to avoid heat loss, increasing it when it's safe to do so. Dinosaurs may have had similar abilities. The fossil record is murky, but the physiological logic fits. And honestly, watching these little raptors hop from rock to rock without so much as a shiver, it's convincing. You sit for a moment on a sun-warmed stone, letting your own feet thaw. You wiggle your claws and sigh, not jealous exactly, just respectful. The wind picks up and the raptors vanish into the brush, gone, in a flicker of tails and laughter-like chirps. You remain a little longer thinking about what it means to be warm in a world that doesn't care about your comfort. Feathers weren't decoration, they were innovation. And when extinction came knocking, the scaly ones had cold feet, but the feathered ones, they had options. They had warmth, and they had places to go. You climb the slope into a clearing dappled with morning frost, and something stops you mid-step a nest. It's cracked and quiet now, abandoned long ago. But it's there, half sunken in icy soil, ringed with small stones padded with ancient plant matter, hardened into a brown crust. You step closer, careful not to disturb it. Even in its silence, it speaks volumes. One egg is still mostly intact, long smooth with a faint mineral sheen like frosted glass. Another is shattered in two, its contents fossilized into a curled shape what might have been a hatchling or might have never gotten that far. You stare at the little bones. The delicate arch of a spine, the suggestion of a beak, frozen mid-hatch. You sit beside the nest and try to imagine the scene. As it was, a parent huddled here, feathers fluffed, tail-wrapped wings drooped over this fragile cargo. Cold mist curling through the underbrush, breath rising in anxious clouds, and beneath it all, tiny lives trying to stir. But the cold won. Dinosaurs, like modern birds, laid eggs. That much is certain. They built nests, guarded them, turned them. Some may have incubated with body heat, others by burying the clutch in warm vegetation. And in warmer climates, that worked fine. But when the air turned icy, things got complicated. Here's the problem. Eggs are vulnerable. They need consistent temperatures, moisture protection from frost. Just a few degrees off, and the embryo inside could stop developing or develop wrong. And there's only so much you can do when the sky's dumping sleet, and your only blanket is your own body. Historians still debate whether cold spells like this one caused reproductive collapses in entire species. Was it a slow decline in hatch rates, a generation of near misses, or just a few terrible years in a row that tipped everything over the edge? Odd fact: in Montana, paleontologists discovered a trove of dinosaur nests with partially developed embryos, all arrested mid-formation. Some appeared normal, others were malformed limbs, wrong spines twisted. Possibly signs of environmental stress, either chemical, temperature-related, or both. You run a claw gently along the edge of the preserved eggshell. It's not smooth. There are ridges, spirals, microfractures. These aren't imperfections. They're adaptations, channels for gas exchange, structural strength. But none of that matters if the nest freezes. That's why you see some dinosaur species building nests on warm slopes in geothermal soil, even in ancient volcanic regions. Not just for fun, for heat. Nest placement was survival. You glance up the ridge and notice the slope angles toward an old lava field, long cooled, but likely warmer ground in its time. This nest you're beside, maybe they gambled it would stay warm enough. Maybe they lost that bet. Further up the slope, you see more clusters. Nesting grounds. Dozens of them spread out over a wide semi-sheltered basin. It must have been a haven, sunlit, buffered from wind, sloped to shed rain. But now, it's a graveyard of beginnings. Some of the nests are deeper, suggesting burrowers. Maybe small herbivores digging into soft soil to protect their eggs from surface frost. Others are simple depressions laid open to the air. You wonder which ones survived longer. The deeper ones, maybe. the ones that thought ahead. A chill breeze stirs through the clearing. You pull your limbs tighter, instinctively mimicking the brooding posture of a nesting theropod. It's not comfort you feel, it's sympathy. A raw, aching empathy for creatures that tried so hard to protect something small in a world that was getting bigger, colder, crueler. Modern birds are excellent parents. They turn eggs hourly, shield them with their bodies. Some even cover clutches with decoy leaves or insulating feathers while they forage. That all started here, in nests like these, with instincts born from a desperation honed in ice. But feathers and instincts can only go so far. If the climate shifts beneath your feet, if the cold comes early or stays too long, there's only so much even the best parent can do. You rise and take one last look at the fossilized hatchling, its beak open, tiny limbs curled. You can almost hear it squeak, almost see it blink, almost, and then it's gone. You step back onto the trail, your own feet stiff with frost. The ground is hard. The air is thin, and the sky above is gray with clouds promising more cold to come. Behind you, the nests lie still. Ahead, the footprints thin. The wind shifts, and suddenly it smells different, cleaner, drier, full of motion. You step into a narrow pass between stone cliffs, and the ground beneath your feet changes. Not frozen, not muddy, worn. This was a road, not built by hands but beaten into shape by feet. Thousands, millions, generations of dinosaurs walking the same path over and over, carving it into the land. Migration. You shuffle forward, following the faint tracks etched into sediment. Some are wide and round herbivores, heavy and slow. Others are sharp and narrow theropods, hunters trailing the herds. It's all here, the great exodus of creatures chasing warmth, like a shadow on the move. Because when the world got cold, some dinosaurs didn't stick around to see what would happen. They left. Long-distance migration may seem like a modern bird thing, but it probably started with their bigger, scalier ancestors. Fossil beds in places like Alaska, Alberta, and even Mongolia suggest certain species appeared seasonally, showing up with nesting patterns then vanishing. Where did they go? South, probably, or down into lower elevations. Anywhere warmer, anywhere safer. You reach a slope of loose shale, each step crackling as it shifts beneath you. You can picture them here, a column of hadrosaurs, winding through the pass, tail swinging low breath, fogging in morning air, feet slipping slightly on the rock. Juveniles pressed close to parents, old ones lagging behind. The very young may be carried or left. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even entirely safe, but it was survival. Historians still debate how far dinosaurs could migrate. Hundreds of kilometers. Thousands. Did they follow instinct, environmental cues, or some internal map we'll never understand? Some say they moved in sync with plant cycles, green waves that rippled north and south. Others think it was purely temperature-driven. You crest the ridge and stop, breath catching. Before you is a wide valley, quiet and pale, under a veil of frost. And across it, visible only if you squint, is another trackway. Faint, yes, but unmistakable. The road continues. Odd fact, in modern times, certain herds of caribou migrate over 3,000 miles a year. And these aren't birds. They're big, clumsy mammals with hooves and opinions. If they can do it, so could a herd of sauropods with enough time, enough reason, and enough cold nipping at their toes. You press on. The wind at your back now. The migration path snakes down into a canyon with high cliffs that protect against gusts. You imagine it was a common route, one passed down through behavior, not language. Follow the stones. Cross the ridge. Turn at the split tree. Trust your feet. You spot a fossil cluster near the trail's edge, partially buried. A smaller creature, maybe a juvenile ankylosaur, curled in on itself, its limbs tucked in, its head pulled close. It didn't make it. You don't stop long. Migrations don't wait. Further along the tracks start to split. Some veer off, others double back. Confusion, panic. Or maybe divergence. Not all dinosaurs traveled together, some went east, some south, some just wandered. And that's the thing about migration. It's not always a glorious march, sometimes it's desperate, disorganized. It's a gamble, a risk, but one they took again and again. And not just the giants. The little ones moved too. The raptors, the protobirds, light enough to glide short distances or strong enough to run for days. You imagine them traveling by night, resting in hollows, fluffing their feathers in shivering knots. They didn't know what lay ahead, but they knew what lay behind. Cold feet. You sit for a moment at a bend in the trail, your toes pulsing with dull ache. You rub them absent-mindedly, thinking about how much of survival is just movement. Keep going. Don't stop. Don't freeze. And perhaps most haunting of all, some of these roots, they're still under our feet today. Ancient roads beneath cities. Fossil highways buried under farmland. They walked here. Then we paved over it. You brush frost from a footprint, place your own foot beside it. Yours is warm, for now. Theirs was not. But it carried them forward. You descend from the high trail into a bowl-shaped valley thick with silence and shallow snow. No footsteps here, no tracks. Just wind-carved drifts and the faint rustle of brittle vegetation clinging to survival. A single twisted conifer leans sideways as though trying to escape the cold in slow motion. And then, you see them small mounds of disturbed earth. Regular, circular, faintly steaming. Burrows. Not the kind dug by claws the size of spades. These are compact, narrow, hidden. You crouch beside one and peek in. It's warm. Smells of moss and fur. Recently vacated or perhaps still occupied by something deep in sleep. You sit back on your heels and smile. This isn't dinosaur work. This is mammal work. While the giants stomped, slipped, and stiffened in the open, the little ones went underground. Literally. During the late Cretaceous, mammals were still small, rat-sized, mostly nocturnal, living in the shadows of reptiles that could squash them with one misplaced tail swipe. But while the dinosaurs ruled the skies and plains, mammals ruled warmth. They burrowed into soil, nested under logs, built insulated homes from the world's leftovers. Their feet, tiny padded clawed, were made for digging. Not wandering, not migrating, hiding. Historians still debate whether these burrowing behaviors evolved because of cold spells or were already in place from earlier times when the Earth saw dry seasons and sudden chills. But by the time temperatures began to swing wildly, mammals were ready. Not with strength, but with shelter. Odd fact, fossil evidence shows that some early mammals even cohabited with dinosaurs. Burrows found near nesting sites living in the literal footprint of giants. Some might have scavenged dino leftovers. Others might have waited for eggs to be abandoned. Cold doesn't just cull, it creates opportunities. You spot movement in the snow, just a twitch, and then a nose appears. Small, twitchy, whiskered, a prehistoric shrew or something like it. It sniffs the air, catches sight of your towering shape, and darts back into its burrow before you can even blink. It didn't need claws the size of knives, didn't need teeth like sabers. All it needed was a plan. As the Ice Age whispers its first breath across the Mesozoic, the mammals are already adapting. They regulate their body temperatures internally, true endotherms, not halfway experiments. They store fat, hibernate, nest, rear tiny young in secret. While the dinosaurs try to endure winter, the mammals disappear into it. And their feet. They're made for warmth, padded for stealth. Not built to crush or chase, but to dig deep and vanish when the world gets too cold to care. You walk further into the valley, seeing more signs. Now trails under the snow, tiny exits and entrances like a network of survival. You crouch beside a tree stump and press your claw into the snow. It's not deep, but it's enough. Enough to stop an egg from hatching. Enough to make a 3-ton lizard lie down and never get up again. Enough for a mouse to thrive. There's something quietly victorious in that. While the great beasts roared and faded, these small creatures just kept going, kept warm, kept hidden, kept breathing. You pass one last burrow, and for a moment you swear you hear movement inside. A heartbeat, a breath, maybe even the whisper of tiny paws adjusting straw. There's life down there, fragile but persistent. The cold can't touch what it can't find. The mammals didn't inherit the earth by force. They inherited it by waiting. And as the cold deepens, as the sky dims and the wind climbs higher, you begin to understand those small, warm feet in the dark. They were the first step toward us. The last rays of sun bleed across the landscape like candle wax, down an old table, slow, golden, and final. You stand at the edge of a wide-open plain, the wind pressing flat against your face, dragging the day into something longer than it should be. The cold doesn't bite anymore. It seeps. There are no tracks here, no nests, no burrows, just flat land. And silence. You walk anyway. The air feels heavier, thicker, like something is holding its breath. The ground is hard, but it's not frost you feel, it's stillness. The kind that arrives when everything that once walked has stopped. And this is where it ends, isn't it? The light fades faster now. There's a chill, not just in the soil, but in the sky. Like something is wrong up there, wrong with the sun, with the seasons. You look up, but the stars haven't come out. The sky is a smear of gray and ash and memory. This wasn't just a cold morning. This was the beginning of a cold night. You sit down finally, your feet numb, your breath shallow. There's no more walking, just waiting. When the asteroid hit, it wasn't fire that killed most of the dinosaurs. Not at first. It was the dark. Ash spread across the sky. Photosynthesis stopped. The plants died. The herbivores starved. The carnivores followed. The temperature dropped. And it stayed low for years, maybe decades. Historians still debate the timeline, the sequence, the cause and effect, but the outcome. That's not up for discussion. The age of dinosaurs ended not with a roar, but with a long, slow shiver. Odd fact, even after the Chicxulub impact, some small dinosaur species might have survived a few seasons longer. Fossils in high-latitude zones suggest this. But in the end, their feet stopped too. They didn't evolve fast enough, or burrow deep enough, or feather thick enough. And the cold doesn't wait for evolution. You lie back now, the sky above turning from gray to something darker. The fan of twilight folds around you like a blanket stitched from the quiet panic of a dying world. You think about all the feet that cross these lands. Clawed, padded, scaled, webbed. Feet that danced, hunted, ran. Feet that carried entire ecosystems. And you realize it wasn't just the cold that claimed them. It was time. And yet, not everything stopped. Because somewhere in a little burrow under frozen fern and volcanic dust, something soft and warm still breathed. Something tiny, something with whiskers, something with warm blood and wide eyes, and feet that didn't freeze. And it would rise when the cold lifted, and walk when the sun returned. And eventually it would become you. The question was simple. Did dinosaurs ever get cold feet? But the answer took us on a journey across frost-bitten valleys, steaming volcanic plains, and silent nesting grounds. We walked in the tracks of sauropods and skittered beside the fluff-coated theropods that flapped through icy mornings. We stood in graveyards where entire herds froze in place and watched feathered survivors shake snow from their tails like nothing had changed. Some dinosaurs may have developed fat pads or thermoregulation tricks to protect their extremities. Some evolved feathers not just for flight or flash, but for warmth. Some moved with the seasons, crossing fossil highways to stay ahead of the freeze. But many didn't make it. Cold eggs failed to hatch, hatchlings failed to run, and feet once firm in the mud gave out on sheets of ice. And yet, below the snow and ash, tiny mammals slept in warm burrows hidden insulated patient. While the giants fell, the small ones endured, not with dominance but with retreat. When extinction blanketed the world, their warm feet kept moving quietly into the future. So yes, dinosaurs got cold feet, but some of them learned to live with it, and others didn't. And now here you are, toes curled under a blanket, listening to the long quiet end of an ancient world.